Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're so pleased to have a state senator with us this morning, Senator Jennifer McClellan.
Thanks,
good to see you.
Good to be here.
You just came from a press conference that the Black Caucus had. Tell us about it. What were the messages there?
Yes, we were highlighting our proposals to address the school-to-prison pipeline. As you probably know, studies have shown that Virginia leads the nation in referring kids to law enforcement. And we also, over the past few years, have suspended or expelled or long-term suspended students at alarming rates. And for both instances, students of color and students with disabilities are suspended higher than other students. There was a study done by Just Children of the school discipline data over the past 2 school years, Just Children, and they released their report that gives those statistics, which are pretty disturbing.
I understand that some children as young as kindergarten age have been suspended.
As young as preschool, actually.
Preschool.
Yes, so there are a couple of bills, and this is bipartisan, so bills that are being sponsored by Senator Stanley and Delegate Dickey Bell that the Black Caucus is wholeheartedly behind would limit the ability of local schools to suspend or expel students pre-K through 3rd grade. You can still suspend if they commit criminal activity or violent behavior. But what we're seeing is too many kids are being suspended for disorderly conduct or things like, kicking a trash can on your way to the principal's office, things like that, having a cell phone, being disrespectful, which are very subjective. And so these bills would limit that. Delegate Jeff Bourne also has a bill that would limit the number of days that a student could be long-term suspended. Right now, you could be suspended for 364 days, which is just ridiculous, and so he would limit it to 45. And then I have budget amendments to provide schools with more resources. One, to fund some evidence-based alternative programs to suspension to deal with some of the behaviors that kids are being suspended for. And then another one to lift the cap on support personnel. When we balanced the budget back in 2009, we put an artificial cap on support personnel, which would include social workers, guidance counselors, nurses, and as a result, a lot of the localities got rid of those support personnel altogether, and our teachers have had to take on the added burden of being social workers or counselors. When they're not trained in it, it's not their job. And so these are just a few of the measures that the Black Caucus announced today. Also giving discretion back to principals about what misdemeanor crimes to report to law enforcement. We used to give them a lot of discretion on whether to address something in the school through the discipline process or to refer something to law enforcement. We took that discretion away. And again, the biggest problem are kids who are being arrested for disorderly conduct. Again, a 6-year-old that kicks a trash can could be sent to law enforcement and charged with disorderly conduct. Or, there was a kid in Prince William County who was eligible for free lunch. He went through the lunch line. He forgot his milk, 65-cent milk that he was entitled to for free. He went back in the line to get it, and the school resource officer charged him with petty larceny over a 65-cent gallon or carton of milk that he was entitled to for free. So these are some of the bills that the Black Caucus had a press conference today to highlight.
And what committees are most of those? In courts of justice, would you say, or?
They're actually in the education committees, but obviously they do touch a little bit on the courts committee, and so it wouldn't surprise me, especially on the House side, if the courts committee wants to take a look at them as well.
Now, you still chaired the King Commission, and I understand there's a new initiative this year?
Yes. So, as you know, this year we commemorate the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. One of the things that we really wanted to look at, and we started last year, was highlighting King's connections to Virginia. A lot of people don't realize he came to Virginia. He visited 12 different localities between 1952 and 1967. We just lost 2 civil rights heroes who worked very closely with Dr. King. Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, who passed away last week, served as his chief of staff for a number of years at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and was the key architect of the sit-in strategy and the Birmingham campaign. And then Curtis Harris, former mayor of Hopewell, who literally served as a human shield for Dr. King on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so what we decided to do was, rather than just have a one-day event on the anniversary of his death, we wanted to have a series of community conversations in each of the localities that Dr. King visited, where we will ask, why was he here? What was going on in the community, to make sure everyone understands the historic context and that locality's connection to King. But then, where are we in achieving Dr. King's vision of a beloved community where racism and sexism wouldn't exist? And we have learned in the past year we are closer, but we're not there yet. And then ask the question, where do we go from here? Which is something that King was really focused on in the last year of his life. Once African Americans achieved, civil rights through the Civil Rights Act and the ability to end segregation, once we achieved voting rights through the Voting Rights Act, what was next? Where do we go from here to achieve that beloved community? And so we will do that in 12 different jurisdictions, starting in Richmond at Virginia Union on March 1st.
And I believe the King Commission website is up as we speak, so people can go there for further information.
Yes.
There are a lot of new women in the House of Delegates primarily, and there is a move to create a Women's Monument Commission. Talk to us about that. I think there's going to be a physical building somewhere here on the Capitol grounds.
Well, it's actually a monument itself, and part of it has already been built, and you can see there's sort of a little garden, and the monument will be called Voices in the Garden, and there will be, I believe it's 8 women who represent significant contributions to Virginia history. Everybody from Martha Washington to Elizabeth Keckley, who was Mary Todd Lincoln's seamstress and a close confidant, to Maggie Walker, the businesswoman and civil rights leader here, to a Indian queen. So I think there are going to be 8, and the statues, they're raising funds for that through the Capitol Square Foundation. In addition to the 8 statues, there will be a sort of wall of honor where other women who have contributed to Virginia history, their names will be recognized.
What changes have you observed as a result of the influx of new women delegates here in the House of Delegates?
Well, on a personal note, it's been, so I was the first woman to be pregnant and have a baby while serving in office when my first son was born in 2010. And it was kind of interesting to see how that was accommodated, everything from finding a place where I could pump or nurse him. When my husband would bring him, there weren't changing tables in the men's room. Now we have Jennifer Carroll Foy, who has twin infants who are 5 months old, and Kathy Tran, who has an 11th-month-old. And to see, particularly Kathy, having her daughter on the House floor during the Governor's State of the Commonwealth, it's not a big deal. And now we have a lactation room in the Pocahontas building. They're building one in the new General Assembly building. They're putting changing tables in the men's room. So just that sort of practical side is huge. But women make up 50% of the Virginia population. But I think we're maybe 30% now of the General Assembly. And just having our voices be heard in louder numbers is very empowering.
Now, what about the whole Women's Health Act? I think that's an attempt to reverse legislation that's been passed over the years here.
Yes, that bill I had in the Senate and Jennifer Boysko had in the House would have codified Roe versus Wade and would have repealed some of the restrictions on women's access to abortion that were passed since 2010. Everything from the requirement to have an ultrasound before an abortion to the waiting period. It would have decriminalized the abortion laws. Abortion is the only medical procedure that is in the criminal code of Virginia state law.
The only one.
The only one. It doesn't belong there. And so it would have taken it out of the criminal code and regulated it through the code sections that deal with every other medical procedure and healthcare procedure. Unfortunately, those bills were killed on a party line vote in the Senate and House committees, but we'll be back.
What about feminine hygiene products?
So Jennifer Boysko also has a bill that would take the sales tax off of tampon and feminine products and sort of treat them as other medical necessities, which the sales tax doesn't apply to. It just makes no sense that you will be, penalized for being a woman, and your menstrual cycle is a fact of life. It is a medical part of being a woman, and yet we have to pay a tax on necessary items that just doesn't make sense.
And you also have an initiative dealing with family life education, I believe.
Yes. So last year, a few years ago, we added to family life education information on how to prevent sexual assault, domestic violence, and similar things. Last year, we allowed the localities to include information on consent being required for sex. But this year, we made that mandatory and made it clear they have to teach the consequences of non-consensual sexual activity, which is a crime. It is sexual assault. And we've made a policy decision in Virginia that sex with a child of any age, under 18, is a crime, and I think that kids need to know that. As amended, the bill also combined a couple of other bills. Scott Surville had a bill talking about the consequences of sexting or posting sexually explicit photos or material on social media, which in some cases is a crime, and kids don't know that. And they also don't fully understand all the other ramifications of doing that. It's in some cases bullying or could lead to psychological problems. And then we also added Jennifer Wexton's bill that includes information on how to avoid, prevent, be aware of child abduction, child sexual exploitation, and child abuse.
Had Delegate Carr in here earlier today, and she and Delegate Chris Peace have some legislation to create a commission to deal with questions of the types of trauma that youngsters are subject to that have lifelong consequences. I take it that's something that you deem worthy of a study.
Absolutely. Child trauma impacts basically everything about that child, their ability to learn in school. Some of the behavior issues that we've seen that kids are getting suspended for stem from trauma they've either personally experienced at home or witnessed. Everything from watching a family member get murdered to sort of having all the ramifications of drugs in the house or in the neighborhood. It impacts their mental health. It impacts some of their behavior that could lead to criminal charges. But trauma can be treated if done early. And if you treat the trauma and help the child deal with that trauma, you avoid some of the negative aspects that could plague that child for the rest of their life.
Now, you mentioned the Voting Rights Act earlier. It has been subject to a lot of debate and court decisions. You were a witness in a court matter that affects local districts in the state of Virginia.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that the state needs to address. It looks like the courts are starting to address a lot of those issues as well.
That's right. And the court case was one that challenges the 12 majority-minority districts in the House of Delegates maps through redistricting, and really asks the question, can you primarily rely on race to draw a district? And unfortunately, the court has had to address these because the preclearance section of the Voting Rights Act was struck down and not reauthorized by Congress. So you have to deal with a lot of this on the back end through the courts. And then the General Assembly itself has not taken steps to address racial gerrymandering, political gerrymandering through redistricting criteria. So it's fallen to the courts to make sure that the 14th Amendment, either through the one man, one vote requirement or the making sure you're not relying heavily on race, I'd rather the legislature do it, but we failed to do it, so it's fallen to the courts.
I take it one of the decisions pending before the court addresses the question of, can you primarily rely on politics as you redistrict?
Yes, that's right. And there was a court case in Pennsylvania that just came out last week that says you can.
And I think they've asked for the justice to intervene in that as well.
Yes, yes.
Voter identification is a subject of discussion. I think there are bills, as there have been in the past, in terms of restoration of civil rights as well.
Yes, yeah. You know, the bottom line is we should be making it easier to vote, not harder. And unfortunately, especially since 2012, we've had a lot of bills and some that have passed, the photo ID requirement in particular, that has made it harder for minorities, students, and poor people to vote. And that's just anathema to the Constitution, to me, and to the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. And it's personal. I mean, as you know, my great-grandfather had to take a literacy test, had to get 3 white men to vouch for him before he could vote. He was born a slave, and yet he fought for the right to vote. Other people died for the right to vote. You know, John Lewis got beat on the head at the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the right to vote. And to watch people take steps to make it harder is just something that I'm going to fight.
Now, the Commonwealth still continues, unfortunately, to rely on the largesse of the federal government. We saw a partial shutdown recently. We may have another one. What do you make of the things that are going on in Washington, D.C.?
You know, when we're in session, I like to say that we're in the black hole of session, and it's not easy to pay attention to what's happening outside of this building. And sometimes that's a good thing, because I think if I were paying too close attention to the day-to-day news coming out of Washington, my blood pressure would be through the roof. But it is disturbing because Congress's failure to act has a direct impact on Virginia citizens and our ability to solve their problems and to provide the services that they have come to demand. And so I am cautiously watching what's happening, as all of us are. And you know, they did reauthorize CHIP, which was good because we were about to run out of money.
That's the Children's Health Insurance Program.
That's right. So that's been reauthorized for 6 years, just in time, because you know Wednesday we were going to run out of money. And so now we'll make sure that those children are continue to have coverage.
With a 51-49 disadvantage still in the House of Delegates, is there any chance that some form of compromise can be made in terms of expanding Medicaid
You know,
this year?
I think so. You know, on the Senate side, Senator Emmett Hanger fully supports Medicaid expansion, had a bill to do that. I think there are a couple of senators who, with some changes to Medicaid or you know, are interested in providing more coverage, but want to do more than just that. I am hopeful, but I think people, you know, during the election, everyone said that health care in general and Medicaid expansion was top on their priority list. There was just a poll that came out that showed over 80% of Virginians support Medicaid expansion. I think individuals need to make sure their representatives are hearing from them now during session to remind their legislators, especially Republicans, this is something we want. And I am hopeful that we will make progress, if not this year, then next year.
Now, one of the stark reminders of that every year in Wise, Virginia, is the clinic.
The RAM clinic.
People line up literally for miles. They stand in line overnight. These are people who don't have health insurance.
Yeah, and this is the remote area medical clinic. And I mean, can you imagine? You see a dentist, you see a doctor, you get your shots once a year, and you have to wait in line for days to do it. It's ridiculous. I mean, that's something you expect from a third world country, not America. And there are too many Virginians, over 300,000 of them, who do not have any kind of health insurance, who are one accident or illness away from economic devastation. And it hit home to me, you know, when my daughter was born 9 weeks premature, and that was a stressful enough situation. But knowing that her medical care, she was in the hospital for 6 weeks, was paid for, I can't imagine how horrible it would have been if, you know, while I'm also worried about her, I'm worried about how am I going to pay for this. But there are too many Virginians. That's exactly what they're dealing with every day.
And these are hardworking individuals.
Yeah.
These are people who are primarily at the minimum wage or who may work more than one job.
Yeah.
Some of them are even on food stamps.
Yeah, it's people who make too much money to qualify for Medicaid, which also in Virginia, our program's so stingy, it's only pregnant women and sick children, and for the most part.
A lot of seniors
And
who
senior,
are dual eligibles.
Dual eligibles, very, very, very sick people who are very, very poor. So we're talking about people who make too much to qualify for Medicaid now, but who don't make enough to be able to buy off the private market or through the exchange. And given what's happening in Washington, you know, who knows what's going to happen with the exchange? We didn't create our own state exchange, so we're at the mercy of the federal exchange. And the Trump administration has made very clear that if they can't repeal the Affordable Care Act outright, they're going to starve it to death.
In fact, the president, I think, recently did away with the individual mandate.
That our Congress did, yes, through tax reform. That's right.
Right.
But so that number, you know, it's a little over about 300,000 Virginians now that don't have coverage. That number could grow based on what happens in Washington.
Tax reform or tax cuts, as some people envision it, what impact does that have on the state? I understand that there have been a lot of unanticipated revenues coming into the Treasury of the Commonwealth, primarily due to advice from accountants to very wealthy people about things they should prepay this year that won't be deductible in 2018.
That's right. So the federal law got rid of the deduction for state and local taxes, and so a lot of people prepay their 2018 taxes, which they wouldn't have paid until probably May. They pay before December so they could get that tax cut or the deduction one last time. Virginia conforms its tax code to the federal tax code, so starting next year you will see some changes to the Virginia tax code. But I'm really concerned about the impact that tax reform is going to have on low-income and middle-class people. I think there's very little, if any, benefit to middle class or low income people. And right now, I mean, if you look at for most people, if you look at your Virginia taxes or your federal taxes, there are very few deductions that sort of middle class or low income people can qualify for anyway. Now maybe because the standard deduction is higher, that helps some people, but I think that's the middle class the most that are going to get squeezed on this, and we'll probably start to see pretty soon just how bad that's going to be. And
to the extent that there are benefits, they tend to be front-loaded and temporary, at least for individuals as opposed to corporations.
That's right. That's right.
Economic development in the Richmond area. I want you to talk to us about why the Port of Richmond is important in relation to the Port of Virginia.
Well, the port, not everything, the more places you have where goods and services can come, the better in general, but particularly when you have them coming through Richmond, that is a direct impact on the local economy for Richmond and the surrounding areas. And both the Port of Virginia and the Port of Richmond have been a huge source of new revenue and jobs that come along with that. So it's been very important to maintain both ports.
And of course, job creation is part of your charge. Your constituents are very interested in that. Dual enrollment with our high schools and our community colleges really promotes that.
It does, and part of what we need to do is make it easier for those students who are going through dual enrollment to make sure their credits count when they get to college. There is it doesn't always happen now, and so I think there's legislation this year to make sure if you are dual enrolled that all of the coursework that you have counts when you get to college, and that you know that up front, rather than wasting the time and money to take a class and then finding out after the fact you don't get college credit for it.
And it appears that we're destigmatizing the trades now. For example, electricians, plumbers, welders.
Yes, and there are so many. Career technical education today is not what it was, even when I was in school. But yes, electricians, plumbers, we're always going to need them. They're always very good, high-paying jobs. The middle class was really founded on some of those blue-collar jobs. But CTE also now includes cybersecurity, biomedicine, biotechnology. That we have lots of jobs right now that can't be filled. Six-figure salaries, over $80,000 a year. Can't be filled because they can't find people with the skills to fill them. And so we're trying to make sure we're giving our students those skills in school so that they can get those jobs when they graduate.
Great. Well, good to see you again, Senator Jennifer McClellan.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.